Fantastic. First, before that introduction, I want to thank Chesapeake Forum. It's a great partnership that we've got here. And, together, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again in February with some kids from YMOS. So we'll see how it goes. It's a pleasure to introduce someone who for a long time was an email phantom for me. Scott Harris got in touch with us over a year ago and offered to give this a talk on his latest book. But when looking at the background of this guy, Harris actually is more renowned at the moment, at least, for writing Westerns. And one of his pages says that he loves nothing more than settling into a hammock with a glass of bourbon, a cigar, and a great Western. And he's written over 15 books in a various series. You'll probably recognize some of these, like Etuchus Bly, Lawman, Abilene Ambush, Stagecoach Willie, this is a series actually, Wounded, Hunted, and Alone, and Coyote Courage. Scott, however, in 2000 moved from his Southern California home to South Carolina, where he is now, I think. And when he did that, he abandoned the Western, at least as far as writing is concerned, and picked up something he didn't expect to be able to do, birding. And he found out that it's something that he couldn't imagine he could ever do, and now, as he admits, he can't imagine being without. So his newest book in this regard is Raptor Quest, Chasing America's Raptors, and he's going to talk about his adventures, his misadventures, the people he met, and a few other odds and ends. So Scott, welcome. It's great to see you.
Wayne, thank you very much, and Trina, thank you, and to everybody who's there. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, now you've already applauded, so I think we should just wrap it up. Any people know you take the win and head home. So, yeah, I'm excited you guys are here tonight, both the in-person and the Zoom. I enjoy doing these in person when I can and Zoom when I can't. But it's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm excited to share. You know, I always say I'm excited to share my adventure, but really this was the adventure of an awful lot of people. I was one of them. And maybe I got the ball rolling a little bit, but shoot, it was a group effort. And I'll talk about some of those people tonight. This book that you see here, this is the book that is the result of my journey, and the photographs that are in it are all my picks, for better or for worse. I figured I had a lot of friends who were birders and photographers who wanted to help me out with photos that were better than mine, but I thought, you know what, this way I don't have to explain, well, Julie took this one or Bill took that one. So there you go on that. And it'll be kind of neat. As much as I enjoyed the journey and finding the Raptors and some of the adventures I'll talk about this evening, really it was the people, as it turns out, that were the highlight of the trip from the beginning to the end. Wayne mentioned earlier that my wife and I retired. Let me just get this going so I can adjust it. There we go. Wayne mentioned that I'd retired 4 years ago. My wife and I lived in California, sold our business, and moved out here to South Carolina, where we have lived for a while and thoroughly enjoy it. The very first day we were at the house, we bought the house online. We never actually saw it in person until we moved out here. And the real estate agent met us to show us around and give us the keys and do all that. And that very first day, a bald eagle flew across the lake. We live on a lake, and landed in a pine tree right at the water's edge. And I thought, well, shoot, that's just a welcoming thing. That's a very cool thing. Because even if you're not a birder, and I was not, this was March of 20, you have to be awe-inspired by a bald eagle. I mean, they're just remarkable birds. I was not a birder when we moved here, and that's my bad. And one of my big regrets is my wife and I had done some traveling. We'd been to all 50 states at least twice. We'd probably been to 35 or 40 different countries. So undoubtedly, I saw a lot of birds and didn't know what I was looking at, and passed up the opportunity to see others. But that's just the way it goes. I've got the hobby now, and I'm good to go, and I'm kind of excited. And so I'm really looking forward to it. Wayne mentioned I'm a writer. I started that about 7 years ago, and I published 50 something books. This is the first one involving birds, and it was a thrill for me to do it. I'm not an ornithologist. I'm not a scientist. I owned a marketing company, my wife and I, for 35 years, and but I knew that I wanted to write something about birding. I wanted to find something that maybe I could share with people and have some fun writing and researching. So most of you have probably seen the 2011 movie, The Big Year. I saw it when it first came out, when I was as far from birding as you could get. But mostly because I like these three actors. I just thought it looked like a fun movie, and it was, as it turns out. Thoroughly enjoyed the movie. Again, a little embarrassed that it didn't inspire me to get into birding. It did have me paying more attention to them, but certainly not doing it full time. I do love all birds. I enjoy all kinds of birding, but there is absolutely no doubt for me that raptors are number one on the list. I'll talk a little bit about why as we go through this evening, but they are. It is raptors, and then for me, all other birds. I'm not saying they're better or worse than other birds. I get that people like shorebirds or warblers or hummingbirds or anything. I was interviewing a guy today for a new book that I'm doing. He's been a birder now for 57 years, and his favorite bird is a bush tit, and he's just fascinated by that. So, I appreciate and respect all the choices, but I thought, okay, this big year thing is kind of cool, but as patient as my wife is with my hobbies, between the time and the money, if I took off for a full year trying to track down 750 birds, I would probably come back to an empty house. That wouldn't have been a good thing. And as I was poking around and looking at stuff, I discovered that there are 53 resident raptors in the lower 48 states. And I thought, well, that is a manageable number. That's probably something that I can do. That seemed kind of reasonable. So I called it my Raptor Big Year. It turned out to be a really big year because it took me 17 months, not 12 months. But nonetheless, it did work out. And that, by the way, was strictly based on my inexperience and my ignorance. I didn't realize how hard it would be to find some of the winter owls. And so I was a little more casual about it that very first winter than I should have been. So I had to wait until it cycled back to the next winter before I could finish those up. But I was determined to get them, and so I did. Among the things I learned early on, that there are 53 raptors generally accepted that call the United States home, if not full-time enough to at least come here and nest a little bit. But what I discovered was there is no generally accepted definition of the word raptor. There is not a scientific definition for raptor. There are competing definitions among different societies and clubs and experts and ornithologists, but there is not 100% agreement. There's not even 100% agreement on this list. The biggest change or the biggest proposed change is that the three vultures may or may not actually be raptors. And I put them in here because all the things that I found said 53. But honestly, after now 4 years of doing this and studying raptors, I would not count vultures among raptors if it was up to me. But of all the people in the world, I'm one of the last that it is up to. So we'll just keep following it. But we've got 3 vultures, 19 owls, and 31 diurnals that are generally accepted as raptors in this country. And while we can't define it, I'm reminded 1964 Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart was asked to define pornography. And he said, well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And I think that's pretty much the way it is with raptors. I mean, in general, they're the larger of the birds. In general, you can find them being more stationary. In general, they're more violent. But there are arguments for others. There's a Harlan's hawk, which is a subspecies of a redtail. And it's mostly in Montana and Wyoming and up in that area. That should be split out pretty soon. It has been split and lumped 3 times already. Sometimes it's a subspecies of redtail, sometimes it's its own species. It's currently a subspecies. I point this out because if you start hanging out up in those areas and you see a redtail, double check and find out if it's also a Harlan's, because you may wind up one day with another tick on your life list with that Harlan's. And so there's a couple of them that are occasional birds in the United States. The hook-billed kite coming up from Mexico, mostly into southeastern Texas. That's a bird that we don't get all the time in the U.S., although it's fairly common in Mexico and in Central America. And then we've got some like the northern hawk owl, the snowy owl, and the great gray owls. I tend to think those are really Canadian birds more than the US birds, but this is America, so we lay claim to everything. So we'll go ahead and grab those birds because they do come down here. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have. And for those that are wondering about the lower 48, Alaska does not have any raptors that we don't get in the lower 48. They do get some rarities that come over the Bering Strait, but as far as numbers that would inflate this, not from Alaska. Hawaii, however, does have on the Big Island only an animal that they must have spent months trying to decide how to name. They call it a Hawaiian hawk, and it is indigenous only to, or endemic only to, the Big Island of Hawaii. And I actually went there last summer for 5 days and looked for that little sucker and didn't find it. They also have barn owls, and they have a short-eared owl, and that short-eared owl will also be split out relatively soon. The research, I believe, has been done. I met with the researchers, and I think it's done, and it's been added maybe as soon as next year or the year after. But it is demonstrably different than the short-eared owl we have here on the continent, and so that should break out and become its own species relatively soon, I would think. This was the distribution. This was my canvas. So I was working on the lower 48. And by the way, all the facts that I'm going to share with you this evening as far as where birds were found and frequency and whatnot, and we won't be inundated with those. It'll mostly be stories. But the ones that I do share all come from eBird. I figured I'd use a single source. It's a fairly well-respected source. Most of us use it. So if you have disagreements with anything that I'm going to state, you're welcome to ask questions tonight or share it with me later. But just so you know, I'm just going to say this is what I found on eBird. I found it very cool that of the 53, 20 of them can be found in all 48 states. And I'm not sure what I expected, but I kind of like that fact that you can find 20 of the raptors. Now, obviously, some are more common in some states than they are in others. But overall, if you live in a single state, you will have a minimum of 20 raptors that you should have access to. Two of them, the northern goshawk, which is now the American goshawk. It was the northern when I wrote the book a couple years ago. And the northern saw-whet owl have only skipped Louisiana. I don't know why they've skipped Louisiana. I don't know if they don't like Cajun food or they don't like parishes instead of counties. But nonetheless, there are no eBird reports of either bird in Louisiana. The snowy owl has been found in 46 of the 48, and it has skipped Arizona and New Mexico. So hopefully eventually it'll be found there and we can fill in some more of this really bright color of green. Oh, no, went a little too far. My apologies. 5 of the raptors are typically found in 3 states or fewer. The Applemata falcon, the ferruginous pygmy owl, the whiskered screech, the hook-billed kite, and the white-tailed hawk. And those are predominantly Texas birds. The hook-billed kite, the ferruginous pygmy owl, the white-tailed hawk, these are birds. If you want to find those 5, you got to head down to Texas. You can find them sometimes in New Mexico or Arizona, even up into Utah, but generally that Texas is the easiest and the best place to find them. This is the distribution of me. I have a lot of people who ask, how long were you on the road? What did you do? Where did you go? I drove whenever I could. That was my preferred method of travel. I did 7 long cross-country trips. I did, and most of those were to Montana, California, Texas, and Florida. I did tens of day trips and overnight trips, just short weekend trips to various places to go try to find something. I did 13 round-trip flights, but because I was going to some small places, it wound up being 50 legs of flights for those 13. And while I hear people complain all the time about the airlines, every single flight that I took off on time. And with a single exception, they all landed on time. The one exception was I was flying from home into Houston, and then from Houston, I was flying into Harlingen, Texas, which if you've been there is a tiny airport. It's really a driveway, but they let planes land there, so it works out well. And I went down to see the bat falcon, which is a rarity that was poking around. And it was the first time it had been spotted in the U.S. and it hung out there for a couple of 3 weeks. And as we got close to Harlingen, it was about 11:30 at night, The pilot came on and said, hey, we've got a problem. It's pretty foggy down there. We're not sure we can get in under the fog and land, but we've got about 15 minutes worth of fuel left. So we're going to fly around in circles for a little bit and see if we can land. And then if not, we'll head back to Houston. Well, I'm not a pilot and I'm not a mathematician, but I figure if we've got 15 minutes worth of fuel left and it took us 45 minutes to get here, we could have a problem. And he must have figured out what he had said, because a couple minutes later he came back on the speaker and said, what I meant to say was we have 15 minutes worth of fuel that we can play with and still be well within the safety guidelines. So we are good to go to get back to Houston, which is what happened. We flew to Houston, we spent the night in a hotel and got the first flight out. I was gone for 25 weeks over the course of time. I visited 34 states and I traveled 100,000 miles. Well, actually, it's like 140,000 miles, but I traveled quite a bit. The cross-country trips I took them all by myself. I bought a truck when the trip started and did the trips by myself. And I did not have a problem. The truck never broke down. I mean, I was extremely fortunate because I was off in some wild places and I was four-wheeling, and there were a lot of times I didn't have cell service. And so I felt very fortunate that nothing happened. The only incident, if you want to call it that, that occurred regarding the truck was, these are the states that I drove to. And these are the ones with the most birds. These are all of the states that I drove to, the 34. And the one incident was in Canada. I was in Kalispell, Montana. I was trying to track down a snowy owl, and I had flown in on Monday and gone out Monday afternoon. I didn't find it. And Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I went early in the morning and late in the afternoon and didn't find it. It had been spotted 3 or 4 days in a row the week before at the Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport. It's a pretty cool little airport, actually. Although I started to think people might think I'm a stalker or setting up to rob people, because I spent 15 or 20 hours driving around this little airport. And finally on Friday morning, I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a break from this. So I drove a couple hours west. There's a place that I knew about that's fantastic for raptors. And I went and I spent about 2 hours and I saw 119 raptors in the 2 hours. It was not counting vultures. It was just spectacular. I've been there a half dozen times. Absolutely love it. When I was done, I typed in Manning Road, which is the main road by the little Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport. And it said, you're 2.5 hours away, which is what it took me to get there. I said, great. I clicked OK, put it up on the screen on the GPS, turned on my book on tape and started driving. About an hour and a half later, I find myself in a traffic jam. I hadn't been paying attention. If it said go, right, I would go right, whatever. And I look up and I'm at the Canadian border. I have gone north instead of east. And I discovered that there is a Manning Road in Alberta, Canada, that was also 2.5 hours from where I was looking for those raptors. And I had blindly followed the directions. So when I eked my way up to the front of the line, I smiled and said to the guy, hey, made a mistake. Just want to do a quick U-turn. It's 100 yards. Head back into the States and head home. He said, let me see your passport. Said, don't have one. Wasn't planning on being here. That did not go over well. They wound up taking the car for about 3 hours. They stripped it down looking for drugs and guns and whatever. And finally they finished. I put the car back together. They gave me a sheet of paper and said, okay, give this to them on the other side. They literally shared a building with the U.S. Customs. Said, give it to them on the other side. They'll let you right back in. I did my little U-turn. The U.S. was no happier having me return than Canada was having me enter, and they held me for another 3 hours. So I spent 6 hours coming up with an awful lot of new words that were inappropriate. When they finally let me go, I was able to race to Kalispell, got there about half an hour before dark. And as I pulled up, I saw a car over on the side of the road. I mean, it's cold, it's snowing, it's about 5 degrees, if I remember right, maybe 10 degrees. And when you see a car out there at that time, it's one of two things. They've either broken down or they're on a bird. So I pulled up behind him and went and knocked on the window and I said, hey, any chance that you're a birder looking for the snowy? And he turned and he pointed and he said, you mean this one about 50 feet away? And there it was on a woodshed in a backyard. And the bird stayed until the sun fell. So at that point, I had about 20, 25 minutes. I got some amazing shots. Not that I'm a great photographer. That's not what I mean. Just the fact that you could get the bird like this, and sat there and watched it. And I was just so thrilled. And this is probably one of the reasons that I really like raptors so much. is you do get to sit and watch them for a while. That'll be a bit of a theme as we go through tonight, but you do get to do that. Whereas if it's a hummingbird, it's flitting by. If it's a warbler, you're seeing a feather or, whatever it is that you're looking for. But sometimes with raptors, you're just blessed with an opportunity to sit and watch the bird, and that's just a fantastic thing for me. So that was one of the great ones. I will share with you there were 8 birds out of the 53 that I only saw once on the trip. Most of them I've seen multiple times since, but during the book writing process, these were the 8. And by the way, of the 53, and I'll talk about it again too, the flammulated owl is the only one that I did not see, that was heard only. I'll share that with you when I talk about Colorado and Rocky Mountain National Park. But all the others I was able to get eyes on, but not the flammulated owl, and I still haven't. I've been back to Rocky Mountain National Park 4 times since this with an expert, and we have heard the bird innumerable times. What I have not done is put the peepers on it. One of the birds that I was very excited to find was a ferruginous pygmy owl. If you're looking for those, a great place to find them, the easiest place to find them in the U.S. is the King Ranch down in Texas. If you're not familiar with the King Ranch, it's a massive cattle ranch, but they also have game on there, and they've been birding forever, and it's a great place to visit. And they do get a lot of ferruginous sightings. To give you an idea how big it is, by the way, it's 825,000 acres. And for relativity's thought, the entire state of Rhode Island is 777,000 acres. This ranch is larger than an entire state. I took a tour. There was a tour guide who was great, and there was a mother and her son. The son was about 20. Both of them were really good birders, so we were the 3 guests. And when we got there fairly soon after we did, we heard one, but it wasn't a great listen, and it wasn't one that I would have wanted to count. A little while later, we saw one, absolutely clearly could identify it, but didn't get a really great look. It was a check off the list one, but not a great look. And about 10 o'clock, we'd been out there about 4 hours. We pulled over to have a late breakfast or early lunch. It's a picnic table out in the middle of nowhere on this ranch. And we pull up and we're all sitting down at this picnic table. And as I take my seat on the bench seat there and I look up, this bird that you're looking at is about 25 or 30 feet away from us. And it's just sitting on this branch. We sat there for a half an hour and talked and ate. The bird never moved. It just sat there. It would preen itself. It dozed off a little bit. It would check us out, but it didn't seem scared at all. It let us take all the pictures we wanted. It was really a blessing. To see a lot of them, trips to Costa Rica, you can find them not easily, but relatively easily. But here in the States, if you want them, I would suggest King Ranch. The other thing I saw on King Ranch is the white-tailed hawk. And the white-tailed hawk's kind of a cool thing. In Texas, it's got another nickname, which is the fire hawk. And the reason it gets that is there's so many prairie fires in Texas. And when those fires hit, of course, the insects are doing everything they can to get out of the way of fire. So grasshopper and other flying insects are taken to the skies. And the white-tailed hawks have learned to follow. They take the trailing edge of the smoke and they wait until the insects show up, which they do, I don't know, by the millions, the 100,000s, whatever the number is. But you will see, as it was explained to me, you will see a large number of white-tailed hawks trailing these fires, just picking off the insects. So the locals call them a fire hawk. I think that's a pretty cool nickname. The young man that I met on King Ranch here was named Frank Fabro, and he was a student at UC Davis, planning on being an ornithologist. And as I explained to him what I was doing on the book I was working on, he said, hey, if you have trouble getting onto a spotted, give me a call. Because I did some work last summer in California for a timber company as part of my internship. And my job was to find spotted owl nests, identify them, and let the timber company know. And then they would set up a 1/4-mile perimeter around the spotted owl so they weren't cutting down the timber and weren't destroying the nest. So that was his job. So when summer came, it was March when we did the ferruginous. When summer came, I called him, and he was very generous and said, hey, come on out, I'll meet you. He told me where to meet him, and it was about a 3-hour drive for him. It was a cross-country flight for me, but I thought he was very generous with his time. We meet at 5 o'clock. We hike up a road through a forest, a little dirt path for about a mile. And then we get to this area and he goes, okay, here's where we got to go. Maybe a quarter mile, third of a mile. We should be able to find a nest. And I looked and this forest was a thicket. It was like a fence or a barrier or an English hedgerow. And he turned around and he handed me a machete. Had two machetes strapped to his pant leg. He said, we got to cut our way through. So we cut our way through the forest and we came into this opening. It was probably 40-foot square. And there was this spotted owl. And it sat on that branch. And once again, the same young man and I sat down to have breakfast. Only this time it was early. It was maybe 7 in the morning. And we sat down to have breakfast. And this spotted owl sat there the entire time. We were there close to an hour. It did not sleep, but it preened. And it dropped down once and took a mouse and came back up to the same spot on the same branch and seemed to have absolutely no trouble with he and I sitting on two stumps having our breakfast. And I just thought, what a magical gift. And of course, I started to think of this kid as the Raptor Whisperer because the 2 times I'd been with him, it was like statues of birds. I wanted to make sure they moved, that I wasn't being punked in some way. But it was really, it's a spiritual thing. It was amazing to me. And I felt so blessed. And we did some more hiking and we found another pair of spotteds and 2 fledges all hanging out in the same tree. So we got to see that as well. And watch them for a bit, coming and going, mom and dad feeding the babies and whatnot. But this was the one that really touched me. And you just look at this bird, and I understand the attraction of all the colorful birds. I just got back from Africa. My wife and I went last month for a couple of weeks, and some amazingly colorful birds on that trip. And I get that this is brown and white and muted, but I think they're remarkable. I think they're stunning. Swallow-tailed kite. So my son he works with me on all my books. He doesn't help me write them, but he walks through my ideas to make sure that they're somewhat reasonable. And the night before this bird showed up, we had rewatched the Big Year. As I had gotten into birding, I thought it would be fun. So my wife and son and I sat down to watch it. And the next day, he and I were out on the lake in the pontoon boat. We stopped the boat in the middle of the lake and just lit up a cigar. And we were just sitting there talking and having a great father-son time, and this and one other swallowtail flew over the lake. So I was able to snap a picture, and then I did some checking. It turns out it's the first time swallowtails have been reported on the lake or in our county. The lake covers more than one county, but it was a first-time sighting. So I called all my local birding friends, and the birds hung around for 2 days, so everybody got on it. And my son and I kept talking, and by the time we came back and docked the boat, we were set on this idea of the Big Year and 53 birds, and we had come up with the name Raptor Quest. And I thought, well, this is the perfect bird to put in the first chapter. Plus, I think they're like the Fred Astaires of birds. They just look so dignified to me, like they're wearing that tuxedo. So that was the day that we kicked off the trip. I mentioned Colorado and Rocky Mountain National Park. There's a gentleman there by the name of Scott Rashid. He has spent the last quarter century of his life working on studying small owls in Rocky Mountain National Park. And it is amazing the work that he's done. He's published books on each of the owls. He's got these 3-inch binders filled with his notes, probably a dozen of them, of charts and graphs and all the things that he does. He does a banding project every year. This photo is I went out on the banding with him about 5 nights. And this is the boreal owl that we were able to bring in. But he put me on 4 different owls over 2 or 3 trips out there over the 17 months. Northern pygmy owl, that's where we heard the flammulated multiple times, the boreal owl, and the northern saw-whet. And the boreal, the year that he and I were, the year that I was on the banding project with him, it was his 24th year of doing the banding. He works with the National Park Service. They give him a building for a month, late fall. And in those 24 years, they'd netted 23 boreal owls, so 1 a year, but it's over a 6-week period. So he said, Scott, look, I can get you on the other 3. I'm not sure about the boreal. In the 5 nights I was there, we netted 2 boreal owls, the first time he'd ever gotten 2 in a year. And so the second one, this is me holding it, he let me release the bird, which was a neat thing. And this guy, you couldn't find somebody who cares about the birds more than he does. We set up the nets every evening, and it's heavy. You're going up a hill, and it's maybe 75 yards from the building, and you're carrying this huge equipment and these batteries and all this different stuff. And then the video shoots down into the building, and you've got these monitors, and you watch to see if a bird hits, because the moment it does, the great horned owls in the area have learned this could be a buffet for them. So as soon as a bird hits the net, we're racing up the hill, and we're getting the birds. And from the time that the bird hits the net until the time we release it is about 6 or 7 minutes. We take it up, we grab it, we bring it back. He weighs it, he measures it, he sexes it, make sure it's healthy, and then we let it go. Even this, me holding the bird for about 30 seconds made him crazy. He said, we got to let the bird go. We can't impact the bird. And that was a pretty cool thing. And I learned a lot about the owls. And by the way, if any of you are ever going to go to Rocky Mountain National Park and you want to do some birding and you want to see some owls, send me a note. I will put you in touch with Scott. He loves helping people. And he's just a generous and a kind soul. So something to consider. But it was a pretty cool deal to get on 4 small owls in a week. The first time I was up there. I've probably been back with Scott 5 times since then, still trying to get that flamulated. But we become friends. We're both playing blues bands, and so it's a cool deal. So that's one of those people that you meet. I did not have any idea who he was before this started. And it's just one of those people you meet on the journey, and you say, this is somebody I'm probably going to hang with for a while. And so you do. So this is a shot from Commissary Ridge in Wyoming. It is a banding station and a hawk watch that operates in the summer. No, it's not the summer. It's spring. Operates in the spring. And I was on the board of directors for the Carolina Raptor Center in North Carolina. And there was a young lady who worked there. I'd gotten to know a little bit, and she quit so that she could go and spend 7 weeks working at this hawk watch. Now, in all candor and full disclosure, I'm not a fan of hawk watches. I don't object to them, but it turns out it's not for me. I went to 8 or 9 of them on the course of this adventure, and sitting there trying to count, wing beats to decide if it's a Cooper or a Sharpie just isn't as interesting to me as watching a bird, but I did want to see her. So I drove out there, I had directions, and when I got close, I couldn't find it. It was up on the top of a barren hill, and I just couldn't find it. And I drove around for about an hour, and finally I found a really nice wooden fence, let myself in, drove down about 3/4 of a mile to a beautiful ranch house, maybe a 6,000 square foot timber ranch house. And I knocked on the door, and a woman opened the door. She was somewhere between 50 and 150 years old. She was not 5 feet, and she wasn't 85 pounds, and she looked like she was made out of leather, and she had the greatest smile. She opened the door, and she's so warm, and first thing she said was, "So, you're looking for the hawk watch?" I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Yeah, I get about one of you guys every week. You want a sandwich or some water, and then I'll give you the directions?" And she gave me the directions, and they were perfect, and she was kind and considerate, and you just the kind of person you want to have met in your life, and that you won't forget. So I did make it up there, and I went to the banding station first, and they let me release this Sharpie. And it was about a half mile over to the hawk watch, and the hawk watch sits on the top of a windswept hill. There's nothing on that hill except rocks, and they've each built a little area out of these rocks. It's probably about 3 feet in diameter, maybe 2 feet high. And they take a cushion from a chair and they put it in there. And they sit in that from sunrise to sunset, 6.5 days a week for 7 weeks. The half day is Wednesday, and that's when they drive the hour into town and they go and shower and get some food and whatnot, because there's no showers or anything. It's boondock camping where they are. And they do this for 7 weeks. And I thought, my goodness, are these people committed? I mean, there's 3 of them there all day long. I probably sat there with them for about 3 hours, and just listened to them talk, and they were having a great time. And apparently there's a waiting list of people to do that. I won't be on it, but these kids were enthusiastic.
His internet's been acting up.
In all the states. But a couple of things that I think are interesting about red tail. The first one most people know, most birders know, is that if you're watching a movie or an ad or a TV show and a bald eagle goes soaring by and and lets out that fierce call. It's not the bald eagle, it's a red-tailed hawk call. And the interesting part about that is it's generally the same call. There was a great recording made a number of years ago, and it just gets passed around among sound engineers. And so every time they want the visual of the bald eagle, but they want that call going out, they all use the same sound from the red-tailed hawk. I just think it's pretty cool. The other thing that not as many people know is that one of the reasons that we have so many red-tailed hawks is due to President Dwight Eisenhower. When he took office in the 1950s, he decided that we should have an interstate highway system. He felt that was important for the country's growth and for whatnot, and for our safety militarily, because in building these highways, he also built landing strips for bombers. But what he also did, and it was a completely unintended consequence, was build perfect red-tailed hawk habitat, because you've got to go through and you've got to cut out the forest and clear this area. And usually along interstate highways, they've cleared 20, 50, 100 feet on either side, which now becomes an amazing place for small mammals. And then the red-tailed hawks are convinced that we're putting up perches for them every 100 yards. We call them telephone poles or power lines, but the hawks call them perches. And so they just exploded. And while others are struggling, other raptors in the country numbers are diminishing. That is not the case for the red tails. So I love that. Peregrine falcon is another one that's made an amazing comeback. If you studied it all back in the 70s when DDT was prevalent, peregrine falcons, brown pelicans, California condors, a lot of the bigger, heavier birds that would eat carrion were dying off because the DDT impacted their eggshells, and when they sat on the eggs, it smashed them, so they weren't having babies. We outlawed DDT as a nation. The birds started to come back, and they're doing well, right? Condors are back now. They've been spotted in 5 states. But peregrines are an interesting story. They have become an urban bird. There is not a major city in the country where you can't find peregrine falcons, and 2 reasons for that. One, because they are cliff nesters. And large cities have skyscrapers, which to peregrine falcons look like cliffs. And so they build their nests on these skyscrapers. The second is generally, an unlimited source of food. They love pigeons. There are pigeons in all big cities, and peregrine falcons think, goodness gracious, you've set up a permanent, full-time, largesse buffet for me. I'll move in. And now cities are encouraging them to move in. And so, for example, I went to the Four Seasons Hotel in Atlanta. I got invited down to talk, and they had built a peregrine falcon nesting box there recently on the 50th floor, which is also their ballroom, which means if you're up there for a bar mitzvah, an anniversary, or a wedding, and they open the shades on the ballroom windows, you're going to be looking out at a peregrine falcon nesting box. And so hopefully this March, when nesting season starts, they'll get their first pair. But there are a number of pairs of peregrines that are nesting throughout the city of Atlanta and around the country. Every bridge in New York City has at least one peregrine falcon nest. My wife and I are up there in May, and they are all over. It's really kind of a cool thing. So bald eagles, you guys are all familiar, I imagine, with Conowinga Dam, right there on the Susquehanna. And if you go up during shad season, I don't need to tell you, but you can see hundreds of bald eagles, as well as double-crested cormorants and osprey, but the main attraction is the bald eagles. So you can see the juveniles and the adults. You can see them fighting over the fish. You can see them chasing away the osprey and the cormorants. I've been up there a handful of times, and I can sit there 12 hours a day for multiple days in a row just to watch those bald eagles. They are just amazing to watch, and to have them in that concentrated area is just remarkable. So I would guess that a number of you have been there, and I certainly plan on heading back relatively soon. I think November is the month where they're there most frequently. I could be wrong, but I believe that is the case. Osprey, maybe my favorite of all the raptors. This shot was taken at a place called Sebastian Inlet in Florida. And if you're not familiar with it, Sebastian Inlet is about an hour north of Vero Beach. And there are 2 walkways on either side of an actual inlet, so that when the tide comes in or out, it funnels through this inlet and it gets pretty violent. But when the mullet run, the ospreys show up by the dozens. And you can get all the pictures of ospreys that you want to get. They are just there's others as well. There's reddish egrets and wood storks and all kinds of amazing birds to watch. But the osprey are the predominant one. And you'll see ospreys pulling 2 mullets out at a time. You can shoot pictures from dawn to dusk, whereas normally they're, not terribly active in the middle of the day. And some of the things that I like about osprey that I think differentiate them from the other birds, besides the fact that we both share a love of sushi, is osprey are the only migratory bird in the world that carries lunch with it. So all birds basically do the same thing. They try to double their weight, their glands shrink down, their organs shrink down or even disappear. And osprey are no different. But the last thing they do is grab one fish, face it head first, and take off on their flight. And for the next however many hours they're in flight, they're just kind of munching on that thing like an inline meal, in-flight meal on an airline. And they're the only one that does that. They're also the only migratory bird that routinely skips the first year of return. So when they fledge and then when they leave and begin their migration, which is usually early fall, that's changing a bit with climate change, but generally, they go down, let's say, to Central America. And 6 months later, when all the other birds are returning, osprey do not. They stay not for 6 months, but for 18 months. On the second cycle through, they do return, and they return to where they were fledged, and then they live that life that all migratory birds try to live. They haven't not figured out yet why it stays and skips a cycle. It stays down there for 18 months. It obviously was strong enough to get there. It would seem it could be strong enough to get back. And if it's so great that they love staying, why come back at all? But nonetheless, that's what happens, and they're the only one that does that. They are also a dive hunter, whereas, say, a bald eagle is a surface hunter. Bald eagles don't dive for their food. Osprey can dive up to 2.5 feet, and they're the only raptor whose eyes adjust for refraction. So if you've ever looked in a creek or a lake and you see a fish, and if you're a kid and you try to spear it or whatever and you keep missing, it's because of the refraction. The fish is not where it appears to be. Osprey's eyes adjust for that. At 80 miles an hour from 150 feet up in a full stoop, they adjust for that, and that's how they hit their lunch at 2.5 feet. Great gray owl, one of my favorites. This was a day that I spent at Yellowstone National Park. It was minus 25 degrees. I try to go each January. Peggy Ford, I just saw you grimace at minus 25 degrees. It's worse than you think it is, because you have to have the windows down and no heater on. If you're shooting, you can't afford, because otherwise if the car's warm and you open the door to shoot this bird, it fogs up and you lose the shot. So this year, for example, when I asked my wife if she would go with me to Yellowstone in January, she said, "You mean where it's minus 25 degrees and you had 1.5 inches of snow on your floorboards?" So she's not going. But I did get to watch this bird for a good couple hours. I saw it dive 3 times, once completely under the snow. I could not see it. It dove completely under, and 2 out of the 3, the hunt was successful. It was a pretty cool thing. I do chase rarities, but only among the raptors, unless I'm somewhere where there's a rarity and I'm there for another reason anyway. But this bat falcon was down in Texas. It came every day for about 3 weeks and then disappeared. Don't know if it was predated or if it just went back to Mexico or what happened to it. And the stellar sea eagle up in Maine, in Aroostook County on the Aroostook Bridge, which is a remarkable bird. It's 50% bigger than a bald eagle. It weighs over 20 pounds. And I went there 3 years ago and didn't get it. And I went there 2 years ago and I did. And when I got it, I also saw it take out a Canada goose. So you can imagine how big that raptor is, that it took out a goose and dropped it down. And boy, when it takes flight, the bald eagles scatter. They scatter like crows do when a bald eagle shows up. It was really amazing. And it had to be shocking because the bald eagle is the apex raptor in the country, except for the stellar. So that had to be a bit of a surprise for it. I heard some people talking before the event started about what the bird was on the cover of the book. And somebody guessed right. It's a northern hawk owl. And that was the 53rd of my 53 birds. This was found in Wise River in Montana. I got a call from somebody I had met. They said, "You got to get up here." My wife put me on a plane the next morning. I flew in, drove about 3 hours to get to Wise River. And I don't know if you know, but eBird ghosts a lot of the raptors. You can report it but they won't give the location except maybe county-wide or a huge area because there's so much poaching. And the northern hawk owl is the same way. So the bird was reported, but it didn't pin down where it was. So I allowed 4 days to find it, and I drove up, and it was getting a little later in the day, and I thought, okay, I'll just turn down this first dirt road and try to get the lay of the land. I had not gone a mile. There were 2 cars on the side of the road, and using the snowy owl theory, I pulled up, and sure enough, I was behind these 2 cars, 15-foot dirt road, snowing, freezing, and on the other side of the road, on a telephone pole that was no longer in use, was this northern hawk owl. So I got to watch it for the afternoon and take some pictures. I went back the next morning, and nobody else was there. I was by myself, and this exact bird flew down from the telephone pole, flew across the dirt road, and brushed up against my pant leg. And I can't tell you exactly why, but that was a spiritual thing for me. And it just kept going maybe 20, 30, 40 feet, landed in a small bush, and just sat there like we were friends. And that was the 6th or 8th time that this kind of thing happened on this venture, where it would just seem like these birds that are unusual and hard to find were like, okay, you found me, take a good look, let's relax. And this one did the same thing. So I saw it again that morning. I came back in the evening and got it again. So 3 different times, probably totaling 5 hours, I got to watch this bird. And except for the first afternoon, I was by myself the other times. And it's an absolutely stunning bird. That's why I threw this picture on the cover of the book. It might have been recency bias. It might have just been my OCD that this was the last one, so I'd make it first on the cover. But this might have been my favorite photograph from the year and a half. And this was the last I saw of the bird. This was the second afternoon when it took to fly off. And when I went back again the next morning, I couldn't find it anywhere. So this was the last I saw of the bird, was it flying away, and I was able to get that shot. So for me, that was incredible. This book, as Wayne mentioned, I've written a lot of books over the last few years. I've written children's books and business books and books of quotations and different things, contemporary novels, but most of the books are Westerns, probably 35 of them. This is my first one in birding. It was completely different, and I absolutely loved it. I couldn't have had a better time with the people I met and the birds I saw and the places I went and the photographs I got to take. The entire thing, for me, was magical. If you were intrigued by the book or some of the photographs, you can go to my website, which is naturallyscott.com. All those things are for sale, but you don't have to buy them, of course. But there's a lot of pictures there, and I broke it down by birds and by location. So if there's a particular bird that you want to see some pictures of, you can find it. My trip last month to Africa, they're not all up there yet, but a bunch of them are. So it's on that Africa trip, by the way, I wound up getting 200 and something new lifers. And to me, most important, 15 of them were raptors, including 3 different species of goshawk. So that was a really cool deal. This is, of all the photographs you'll see tonight or in the book, or if you go to the website, this is the only photograph that's doctored. This is a ferruginous hawk in Pinnacles National Park in California. The hawk is real, the sky is real, the power line that it's standing on, the crossbar is real, and even the yellow sign is real, except in real life, that yellow sign says high voltage. I changed it to thank you because it's the last one for the evening. And so I took the liberty of doing that. I hope you'll forgive me. But I did want to say thank you very much to all of you for being here this evening, and especially to my wife, who is so incredibly kind to support me in all of my hobbies and my endeavors. With that being said, I'm welcome. You're welcome to ask any questions, and I'm happy to answer them. And as I do that, if any of you have questions that come up afterwards in the next day or week or month, you can contact me through the website. You can call me, text me, email me, whatever you want to do. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff, to hear your stories or to answer any questions you might have. So there you go. Thank you. Any questions I can answer?
Anybody online or here?
Pardon?
I've got one on the chat, Scott. Give me just a second.
Sure.
I have a question on the chat.
Oh, it's just a comment. What a great presentation. Thank you, from Debbie Bennett.
Well, let me just say Debbie Bennett is obviously brilliant and beautiful. So we can all agree to that right away. Thank you, Debbie.
I have a question.
Sure.
So how many Raptors do you have as your yard list there in Atlanta?
My yard list, I would guess that my Raptors are up about, that's a good question, I should look, but I would guess about 15 or 17. My yard list is 120 something birds, and that is enhanced by the fact we live on the lake. So, we see birds that people that live a half mile from here wouldn't see generally. But I would say about 15 or 17 is a good number. I have some regulars, turkey and black vultures. We get red tail, red shoulders, bald eagles. We get some Coopers and some Sharpies. There was a Sharpie here for a while that thought my feeders were a buffet. And I don't know what happened to it, but it stopped coming. And then we get some rare, a Merlin might come through or something unusual. So I would think that would be about it.
Scott, we have another question. What is the name of the lake you live on in South Carolina?
Lake Greenwood.
Thank you. And a new question. What is your favorite camera kit?
Okay, I'm going to answer. I'm happy to do that. But I have to tell you, I've given this presentation quite a few times, and I love doing it. But Sunday I gave one, and it was the first time I've done it where somebody didn't ask me about the camera equipment. So I'm glad somebody did, just because I think it's kind of neat that they do. I generally carry two cameras. I've got a harness, and I carry two cameras. One of them is a Sony A1, and it's got a 200-600 lens. It's a digital, obviously. It's mirrorless. It shoots 30 frames a second. It's 50 megapixels. I think it's magnificent. And then the other one is a Sony A9 with a 70-200. And it has all the same attributes. So my range is 70-600. So on a trip like the one, say, to Africa last month, sometimes I'm shooting birds that are far away, so I need that 600. And then sometimes literally there are lions brushing up against the Jeep, and even the 70 is hard to work with. And I do that. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going out to California to shoot marine mammals, whales and elephant seals and sea lions. And again, I'll bring both because it'll be a pelagic trip. I'll get some great seabirds, but I'm also hoping to get some large marine mammals coming up close. And when you're on those trips, when you're on the water in the desert or out on safari, you might not have time to change the lens. You don't get to know in advance. But even if you did, it becomes dangerous to do so. You get grit in the camera. It's hard to change them without that being a problem, or on a boat getting spray. So I just carry both. My wife says I got a pistol on one side and a rifle on the other. And I'm a Sony fan. I think they're the best, but I readily admit it's a Ford, Chevy, Pepsi, Coke thing. For the people who like Nikons or Canons, I am certain that they're just as good. This is what I've gone with. And once I started, then that's all I do because it's just easy.
Hey, Scott, here on the Eastern Shore, our osprey numbers are low. I've heard two different reasons, and I'm wondering what your opinion is. One, their food source has been decimated because of overfishing, or two, they're just sick. Do you have an opinion on the osprey number?
Well, I have not heard of widespread illness among the osprey. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I've not heard of it, and I've talked to a lot of people who work with osprey. I tend to think that some of it has to do with overfishing and a reduced number. And, each habitat, each area can only support so many osprey. They eat quite a few fish. And some of it might have to do with climate change. We're getting a lot of overwintering down here in the southeast, whereas it used to clear out the osprey. Now it doesn't in Florida. I don't know if any of them leave anymore. And even here on our lake, this is the first time that we've had or the first time that I know of. But our osprey are pretty active out here. This is the first time that a couple of them have overwintered. And so I just think there are so many changes going on, obviously throughout our wildlife and birds, that I don't think we have the answer. But I would tend to put it closer to climate change than illness.
Thank you.
Okay, I got a question for you.
Sure.
So you were talking about how that owl had a bit of an interaction with you, the northern hawk owl, how it brushed up against your leg, and
Yes.
is about a bald eagle experience that I had. Could this have been an interaction between the bird and myself, or did I just spook it and it behaved differently? And so here's what happened. I was on a walking path and there was a bald eagle who was flying in, taking sticks off of a dead tree and then flying back to its nest. And one of the times I was sitting there watching it for maybe 20 minutes. One of the times it flew to this high up tree and then came down and dropped a stick about 30 feet away. Does this behavior sound?
Mr. Head.
It was a totally different path than it was taking before, and I was just wondering what your takes on that are, and did you have experiences with raptors interacting with you at all?
Yeah, I would say so. First of all, raptors are known for being picky about the sticks they build their nest with. So quite often they'll grab a stick or a twig, and then they decide, no, this one isn't going to work, and they drop it. And it may have been if you had just sat there for 20 minutes quietly and not moving a lot, that it just said, you know what, there's no danger here. I think I'm just going to go on with my life. And so it might have been reacting to you, but it might very well just have rejected the stick and said, you know what, this isn't going to work on the nest.
Thank you.
Because the bald eagle wives are picky about which sticks they let the husband bring in, even as massive as a bald eagle nest is. They are picky about what they're adding to it, and I don't know exactly what it is where they'll pick it up and think, oh, I think she'll like this, and then drop it and say, nope, this one isn't going to work.
So they're kind of like humans?
It's very much like humans. If you find a species where the husbands understand what the wives are doing, let me know.
Anybody?
In your experience, is the burrowing owl commonplace, or was that a difficult one to find?
Well, both. So there are, Arizona has some that you can find, and I've done that. But the place to go, if you want to see a burrowing owl, it's funny you would bring that up because I just booked a trip today to go see them again in February, is Cape Coral, Florida. So Cape Coral, Florida bills itself as the burrowing owl capital of the world. I don't know if it's accurate or not, but it's got to be close. And so what Cape Coral does, and they have a lot of burrowing owls that live there year round. Once the owl takes over a burrow, like a squirrel burrow or whatever it might take over, and it's established it, then the town comes in and they put PVC pipes, probably about 15-foot square around that burrow. And so as you drive through town, you'll see those things on the meridian, on the road coming in. You'll see them in people's side yards. You'll see them all over. You see these white PVC pipes that are saying burrowing owl. There is a series of baseball fields, little league fields. I forget the name of them, but that's where I always go. And in the outfield, behind one of the fields, there are usually about 15 different burrows there. And they put a T-perch right by the opening to the burrow, so the owl can pop out and jump on this 12 or 18-inch perch. And then you've got the white post, so there's no work to finding it. I mean, you don't have to be a skilled birder at all. And they're used to humans. And I've been there 4 or 5 times with different people and friends and family and stuff. I've never seen somebody abuse the PVC pipe. You know, a lot of times you'll see birders that are over aggressive and they're putting stress and pressure on the bird. I've not seen that down there. It might be because there's so many of them and you can get so close anyway. But you can get right down, lie down on the grass and shoot them at eye level. And if you go to my website and just do a search for burrowing owl, you can see a bunch of them. But Cape Coral, Florida is the place that you want to go. That is where you want to go because you will, as close to a guarantee as you're going to get. One of the books I'm working on now is called American Safari Zoos Without Fences. And the idea behind the book is the places in the country that you can go to. And if you go at a certain time of year and you go to this exact location, you're virtually guaranteed to see the animal that I describe. And the book is going to be all about mammals, land and terrestrial, and raptors. And Cape Coral, Florida will be one of those. Conowinga Dam will be another. Sebastian Inlet will be another, you know, as far as the raptors go. But unless the world changes dramatically, if you make it to Cape Coral, Florida, which is on the west coast between Sarasota and Naples, you will see as many burrowing owls for as long as you would like.
I have no more questions online.
Any more?
No,
Thank you.
I think that's it.
Okay, Scott, really thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you for all the questions, especially. I love the questions. Have a great night and have safe and successful birding.
You too.
Yeah.
Scott.